I'm going to be putting on some footage of the poison pawn. So that'll play in the background on a loop, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah, check it out. And Aaron, take it away.
Well, so for people who have played Overseer, there's a lot of confusion about what is the difference between the original Overseer and what we're doing now with Poison Pawn. Originally, I think it started out as really just an update, and when Chris Jones and I were able to see the work that they had done, and we were absolutely blown away by it, we started talking about, you know, the possibility of actually elevating this to something much more than just a remake. And so what it's evolved to at this point is we feel like we have an opportunity to almost like make a greatest hits album here, and to, as the people who've watched this documentary have seen all of the great moments that we've had from the previous games, to be able to incorporate those into one big all-encompassing game that kind of takes everything to a certain point where we look at everything that Tex has done through all of the different games and stories and understand that they've all been connected, that there's all been kind of a purpose to his existence. And that's what this game is going to be about, really, is that we're going to have a brand new narrative that kind of starts with Tex today in his life. And he's going to be talking about this old case, which was the case that was in Overseer and in Mean Streets, but he's telling it to a new person for new reasons. And so there are going to be a lot of new details, different takes on the events that happened, and of course, visually, it's going to be very different. And there are going to be things that they're looking for in that story that weren't important at the time and are now vitally important to what's happening to Tex. And so people are going to be able to experience some familiar things and then a whole lot of brand new things in this game. And then we feel like the game experience itself is going to be just light years ahead of anything we've been able to offer so far. And then ultimately the plan is that if we get enough people to really enjoy this game and to get the financial support for it, that we would want to do one last huge, amazing, epic game that would be kind of the final chapter in the series. And for those who don't know, the last game that we did that really was like that, where Chris and I were both equally involved all the way through and doing exactly the kind of game we wanted, was Pandora Directive. And I think a lot of people feel like that's kind of their favorite story experience, overall game. I feel like the game that we would do to kind of wrap up the series would be Pandora on steroids, and very excited about the prospect of that. But I'm as excited right now about Poison Pawn.
Yeah, it was fantastic because, I mean, I remember walking up into Aaron's office because we both work here at Big Finish Games, and it's sometimes surreal for me because when I look at Chris Jones, I still see Tex Murphy. So I'll walk into Chris Jones's office every other day and I'll see Tex Murphy sitting in his chair. But when I walked into Aaron's office this one particular time, I said to him, so what are you thinking? How do you feel about the new script? And I remember you turned to me and you said, I have a feeling this is going to be the best Tex Murphy game yet. Yeah. And I think with the way the visuals look and how the Chaotic Fusion team is building this game, it will potentially be the best Tex Murphy game yet. But it is by no means, hopefully, not going to be the last. We have written on the website that we have considered it basically Act 1 of the final chapter of the Tex Murphy universe. So I guess the question that a lot of people asked in either the Kickstarter comments, on Twitter, on Facebook and everything is, you know, what is our big announcement here? Because a lot of people already knew about the Poison Pawn. However, a very large percentage of our Kickstarter backers, and that was 7,000 plus, were A, not aware of the Poison Pawn, and B, sort of confused as to what this means for the future of Tex Murphy. Let's say that Poison Pawn is a game that becomes as successful as we either hope or imagine it will be. What can people expect to come from the story of Aaron Connors that will eventually come into the conclusion of the Tex Murphy series?
Yeah, I think if you notice the final shot of that trailer for the Poison Pawn, you see Tex kind of look up into the camera. And Chris is a person, as a human being, not Tex. You know, he's aged amazingly well. Mm-hmm. But he's a much older guy than when Mean Streets was out there. You know, we're talking 30 plus years ago. And what we have is a very unique opportunity to tell a story with a character spanning an arc of decades. And there's been no other adventure game, especially with full motion video using like live actors, that has been able to do that. It's a very unique opportunity for us. And so Chris is very excited about that. Like the idea that you have this young, naive Tex in his first case, which is a big part of this game experience, but throughout the entire game, you have him commenting on what's happening and understanding the context of things, looking back at it, and then comparing his choices that he made as a young man versus how he would do them now. And I think it's going to be just a really cool way to explore that whole theme of age and, you know, things that we learn as we get older and appreciating, you know, all the various opportunities that we have throughout our life. And so, not to get too saccharine about it, but to me, it feels like a way to really tie the entire Tex Murphy series together. And then if it goes on from there, that would be great. But at that point, we would have everything all kind of, you know, connected together, and that's an exciting thing for us.
No, exactly. And I think it's always been your goal, yours and Chris's goal, to sort of see Tex Murphy up to a climax. And I think towards the end of 1998, where kind of like Microsoft came in, and as we saw in the documentary, the whole kind of series stagnated for a time. And when Kickstarter came around, it was definitely a fantastic opportunity to resurrect Tex. But when the Kickstarter did succeed, even though you saw that there was this still huge fan base out there that was really interested in reviving Tex, did you imagine that this was going to, you know, to borrow the same phrase, kickstart the Tex Murphy genre as a whole? Or did you consider this as, okay, this is another shot to get more Tex out there? Did you really expect it would potentially evolve into something that would have the series start and continue to its conclusion?
Well, I think clearly we hoped that it would generate enough interest that we'd be able to move forward with it, because it's been unfinished for so long. You know, we've had these stories that were partially told through radio theater, the cliffhanger at the end of Overseer, things like that. Clearly, we wanted to take it somewhere. Yeah. And so, you know, the fact that we didn't really get that opportunity was very frustrating. But at the same time, I would say that the primary reason we did Tesla Effect was for our fans. Yeah. It was not so much with an eye on how can we get to do more stuff. It was what can we do to really thank the fans for their patience, for their continued loyalty. And that's why I love the fact that the Kickstarter process allowed us to really engage closely with the fan community. That was something that was very important to us, and to let them know how grateful and humbled we were by their support.
Of course, yeah, exactly. And I think it was that fan service that Tesla Effect did that sort of helped Big Finish Games, or like you guys, the old Access Software crew, reconnect with the fans. Because, I mean, you know, using myself as an example, I was a follower of it, and then I came on board and ended up working with you guys. So it's testament to the sort of the community nature that these guys had and the innovation that they had within this particular industry. And it's actually fantastic that we all get to work together to sort of see Tex Murphy to this fantastic climax. Speaking of what you guys are seeing on screen at the moment, so this is I pre-recorded this just yesterday, so this game is still in alpha at the moment, or very early alpha, as Darren will turn around and say. Make sure you let people know it's very early alpha. So it's very important to let you guys know that what you're seeing on screen at the moment is kind of like where we're headed with the game. Of course, it's constantly being polished and improved, etc. Okay, we got a few questions coming in here before we move on to talk more about the game and the development, etc. We have one for Aaron. It says, what is your reaction to the direction that Chaotic Fusion have taken with the game's visuals?
It's kind of like this.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy good.
Yeah. We also have another question for Holger. It's like, aren't you worried that having huge environments can make the adventure part of the game too hard for finding objects, etc.? I think we spoke about this, Holger. Like, the expansion of the locations is fantastic. How are we going to keep people on track if they have this freedom available to them?
Well, first of all, I think having those outside environments is a nice, adds a lot to the atmosphere. And well, I don't think so that, I think it's really nice to have this outside environment. So that's a lot of atmosphere to it. And that it's not an open world game. So these areas where we have are restricted somehow. So you mostly have a one street. So they're not that really big that you get lost in there.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you know, comparing it to other games that sort of employ the kind of adventure exploratory, I just recently been streaming a game called Soulless Project over on the GOG Twitch channel, who, by the way, are donating some copies of the games for us to give away, so please stick around after that. But I've been playing that game. Now, that is an example of a game where you pretty much have a very large environment to explore and you need to find things, but what the game mechanic does is it knows a way to nudge you in the right direction, and I believe Holger and I already spoke about that. Despite the fact that some of these environments have opened out quite a bit, a lot of the puzzles we're hoping to program into this game are going to be environmental. So don't worry, you're not going to have to crack into someone's mailbox via a slider puzzle. That's not the case of the puzzles in this particular game. We will use the environment to your advantage. So what you're seeing here is an entire street here. How do you know which house to enter? Well, the game is going to let you know. It's not going to let you know with like a big flashing arrow or something. We will write it. Aaron will write it. We will program it, and we will design it in a very smart way that gives you a very solid indication of where you should be going as a player, while at the same time feeling you can still explore things if you decide to get off the beaten track. And if you do decide to get off the beaten track, we're hoping to populate with the environment with enough stuff for you to look at. So if you decide, oh look, a billboard, I'll sit and watch this television program for the next 10 minutes because I can. And that's basically the goal we're going for. So basically a combination of, yes, it's a bigger environment, but we're going to use that environment as the primary puzzle mechanism to nudge people in the right direction.
If I could just add something to that too.
Sure.
As I was saying earlier, that the game experience is going to be pretty significantly different from Overseer. That is a good example of that, is that the design that we'll be doing to fill this world will be inspired by some of the things that are related to the Overseer game, and anything that's related specifically to the story, obviously. But there's going to be a whole ton of new gameplay in this. And so having played Overseer 1,000 times will probably not give you that much of an advantage coming into this game. So that's something to keep in mind, is that we're going to really change the experience of playing the game, but we're going to, as Matt was just saying, customize the gameplay to really suit how we have built this world. And so there'll be a lot of exploration, there'll be a lot of collecting, there'll be things that encourage you to get out and actually look around the world to unlock all of the cool stuff that's in there. There'll still be all of the Tex Murphy stuff. There'll still be puzzles to solve. There'll still be, deductive reasoning to do and all of that, the typical detective stuff.
Sure.
But we're going to be adding a whole other level of stuff that really takes advantage of these environments.
We have a question here for Aaron. When can we expect the Poison Pawn novel to hit online bookstores?
The plan originally was to get the novel out soon, and as we've kind of gotten deeper into the development of this game, we've decided that it's best to kind of postpone it and have it be something that comes out shortly before the game, just to kind of generate more interest, get people excited about it. Mm-hmm. So the first draft of the book is actually done. I could wrap it up here in the next little bit and release it, but I think we're going to hold off on it. But the one thing that some people know, and other people might want to know if they're interested in the books, is that as people know who've played the games, we had that awesome cliffhanger at the end of Overseer.
Oh, it was awesome.
Which everybody loved and was so excited to get to wait 15 years to get an answer on it. So as people know who played Tesla Effect, we jumped forward about 7 years from that moment in time. And there's a lot of stuff that happened during that period, which Tex does not know about because he has no memory of it at the start of the Tesla Effect story. And he makes a conscious decision to not restore his memory because he knows some bad things happened during that time. And people have told him, you're better off just not knowing this stuff. So, but to me, it was important because a lot of cool stuff happened to Tex. And right now, with the full motion video limitations, we can't make our actors look 20 years younger, unfortunately, without it looking really bizarre.
Of course.
So for that reason, I have been eager to tell that story of what happened from the moment that they were abducted at the end of Overseer. And there's a whole full story that happens there. And there are things that are really cool and relevant to what happened in Tesla Effect and in Poison Pawn and in hopefully the game to come that do happen. You wouldn't need to know all of those things to enjoy those other stories. But I think for people who really love the series and are into the canon of the story, it would be a really welcome addition. And honestly, I think the story in and of itself stands against any of the other stories. So that book is something that I do intend to release coming up probably June, July of this year. And I will certainly let everyone know and, get out some sample chapters for people to read and kind of hopefully, increase the excitement for it. So that's planned. So to summarize, new novel coming out sometime in the next 6 months or so, but it would not be the Poison Pond novel. That will come out in about a year or so.
Okay, fantastic. So there you go, some juicy stories from Aaron. I mean, I remember sitting and I've probably read Pandora about 8 times, Under a Killing Moon about 11. I think they're the most cinematic. And just to give you guys a general idea, a lot of these books break open the Tex Murphy universe significantly, and they're extremely cinematic read. I mean, I remember reading the Under a Killing Moon novel and thinking, this plays like a movie in my head. Yeah. It's absolutely beautiful. We also have another question with regards to someone who says, if I haven't played Overseer, should I wait now for the Poison Pawn, or wait for you guys, or would I better to go back and try Overseer anyway? I'll let Aaron mention that because he kind of ties in with the whole story element. But I'll say, if you can get it running, then by all means go for it. No, the version on GOG is actually very good. It is a very stable version, and one of our fellow Tex fans as well as GOG streamers, Pantsless Aaron, recently streamed it on the GOG channel. So even if you can't play it, Let's Players and watching other people who have taken the time to actually get the game running on their machines are a good way to experience the game. And Pantsless Aaron is a fantastic guy, so I feel free to check it out. But Aaron, in terms of the story, I mean, is it really important that people go back and play Overseer, or are they going to experience enough of the Overseer vibe through Poison Pawn?
It's a really interesting question because they're going to be such different experiences, and you have to think of it in terms of if you had a portion of your life where a lot of things happened and people were curious about it, and when you tell that story to someone at a particular time in your life, depending on who it is and kind of where you are mentally, versus telling it to someone else at another point in your life, the emphasis of that story that you tell may be different. You may have learned things, taken things away from it. That's kind of what this is going to be, is that when you look at Overseer, what you're going to get is probably a simpler, more innocent, naive take on it. And what you're going to get with Poison Pawn is a much more bittersweet, mature, a little darker experience. And so I would just take that into account and say, okay, will it feel like if I do Poison Pawn first and get this really dark, deep experience and then go back to something that's a little lighter, whether that is the way you want to do it, or you want to start with something that's a little bit lighter and then move to the darker one.
Sure. I think that's actually a really great way to put it. It's kind of like, I think for a lot of people who haven't played Overseer, half of the joy of the Poison Pawn is seeing that Overseer tale from a different perspective. It's kind of like when you watch a movie after reading the book, and provided that movie's done right and not chop the shit out of the book, you can get that sense of, wow, so that's how it was really interpreted, or that's how the director saw it. That's kind of like what the Poison Pawn is going to be. It's going to be kind of like, so is this how Tex saw it then compared to how Tex sees it now? And of course, more of that will be revealed later on. We can't talk too much about it, otherwise it'll give away too much of the story. But we can guarantee that how we're going to be looking back on the Overseer story, or the Overlord story from the Poison Pawn perspective, is going to be, as Aaron said, a little bit darker, a little bit more detailed, and graphically more impressive from a technical sense here.
One thing to keep in mind if you have played Overseer is that Tex's motivation for telling the story was because Chelsea wanted to know about his ex-wife. That was really the whole motivation behind it, because she was kind of obsessed with who this woman was and why he married such a crazy broad.
My friends asked me the same thing.
But with Poison Pawn, there's going to be a completely different motivation for telling the story. It's going to be a really cool, mysterious thing that is tied directly to what's happening to Tex in his life. It's not really a personal thing. It's more of a key story element. And so he is trying to solve a mystery about what's happening to him right now by digging back into the past to find clues. So it's a very different approach to why they're retelling this story.
A lot of people have asked, what is the balance between what we're remastering from Overseer and what we're going to shoot new for Tex? So I'm going to hand over to Aaron in a sec here. I will talk about the remastering. So I do have access to the original Overseer tapes, which are all shot on my strand's going to show. I was going to call it Betacam, Betamax or Betacam Pro. They're still in fairly good condition, so we may go back and explore using that. Our goal is to get some of that content integrated into the game in a very creative way. So we are going to go through the remastering process of that and hopefully deliver that content back into 4K as well. But regards to some of the new full motion video sequences, with the way that you're writing it, Aaron, what can people expect to see for the brand spanking new shiny 4K Chris Jones in all his high fidelity glory?
Well, so if people are familiar with Overseer, we called the scenes between Tex and Chelsea the framing narrative. So we started out the game with Tex and Chelsea talking, and then we would flash back to his earlier case, and then periodically come back to them commenting about the story that he's narrating to her. This is going to be the same kind of setup that we have with this particular game, but it's an older Tex, and he's talking to a character that was in the Tesla Effect story, Count Saint Germain, and they will create this new framing narrative. And as I was saying earlier, they are tasked with solving a mystery, and that's presented right up at the beginning of the game, and they know that the answer to this mystery lies somewhere within that first case, the details of what happened to him when he was a young man. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things about Count Saint Germain is that he has certain abilities to be able to use some regression techniques, therapy or hypnotherapy, that kind of thing, to help Tex unlock some of these memories which are, you know, buried deep within him. And so that whole arc of the framing narrative is really about Tex and Saint Germain communicating about what is happening as he's narrating the story of his first case. And there's going to be a lot more connection between what's going on between them and what's happening in the story. With Tex and Chelsea in the original Overseer, we'd go long periods without cutting back to them. Here it's going to be much more integrated because they're really trying to solve this mystery, and as new things come up in the story, there's going to be a lot of interaction.
Okay, fantastic. We had a question in chat, which I'm going to also throw across to Darren here. With the fact that this game has evolved beyond just an Overseer remake, are we still sort of dropping the core Overseer experience? And that's an excellent question, because we're encouraging people who can't play Overseer to give this game a shot to get the Overseer experience. However, if we diverge from the story a little bit too much, it technically isn't the traditional Overseer experience. So I'll hand over to Darren to explain to you guys what we have planned for the core Overseer experience in the Poison Pawn.
Yeah, so when we started on obviously just the remake, and it was just going to be a straight up Overseer remake, everything sort of was fairly easy to follow because we had that template. And when the game shifted to the Poison Pawn, I mean, for one, I really do enjoy the Overseer story. I think it's really great, and I didn't want to lose that experience with that sort of those interactions between Tex and Chelsea. So at that point, I sort of made it a part of the sort of the engine framework that we would be able to run sort of the two games together, essentially. So we have the Poison Pawn, but what we also want to do is have the original Overseer game maybe as like an unlockable feature where you can still go back and play that original storyline and sort of see the differences between the two.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic, because, I mean, once you complete the Poison Pawn and you're curious as to how the difference is, you'll have this nice little unlockable thing saying, "You've unlocked the Overseer mode. Everyone, 2 games in 1. Buy now." So it'll be absolutely fantastic. Do we plan on giving Under Killing Moon and the Pandora Directive the same treatment? Now, I will say that nothing is ever ruled out in the world of creativity in video games, but I will say that elements of the Poison Pawn are going to revisit aspects from those early games. You've seen it in some of the shots. You've seen some of the Moonchild. In the trailer, you saw some of Area 51.
Roswell.
You know, yeah, Roswell there. Sorry, I keep... And I'm supposed to be the Tex fan here. But here's the writer. Here's the writer. You saw some elements of Marshall Alexander's office from Martian Memorandum. I'll throw over to Aaron. So how much of the earlier games are we going to get to see and experience in this, as well as little throwbacks?
There will be some dedicated sequences which are specific to the older games. So we will have a playable area and associated story content for Martian Memorandum, for Pandora Directive, Under a Killing Moon, and even Tesla Effect. Because all of these, you have to keep in mind that even though we're telling the story of Tex's first case, that framing narrative is after Tesla Effect. And so everything from Tex's perspective has happened previously. And so it all factors into what's happening with this story. So there'll definitely be extended sequences where we're going to see things that will be familiar to you if you know those stories, if you played those games, that will then go much deeper than anything that was in that game. And everything that you discover with this going deeper process is going to tie directly to what's happening in this new story. So again, it's going to be cool because it just ties all the pieces together. It's like we've had an idea of what was going to happen from the very beginning with this whole series of games and stories, and to finally reach a point where we can bring all those loose threads together is pretty exciting for us.
All right, question for Matt and Aaron. What will happen to the Tex Chelsea date at the Golden Pagoda in the narrative wrapper? I guess this is a good opportunity to explain how the whole Tex Chelsea, because you already alluded to it, it's very different this time around. It's a lot darker. Maybe you provide more information with regards to how the new wrapper works and how the old wrapper is going to tie in.
Yeah, the way to think about this is again, like if you've told a story to someone at a particular age and then you told the same story 10 years later to someone else, that's what's happening here. So Tex told the story to Chelsea and Overseer. He's telling it to someone completely different in this new story. So the Tex Chelsea stuff is going to be completely replaced. So we're not going to be using that at all in this new game.
Sure. But just to be clear, as Darren said, it will be available, the old FMVs, etc., will be available for the Overseer core version, which will be an unlockable piece of content there that you can play after completing the Poison Pawn here. Let's see. Similar trim, we've got that one. Question for Aaron. I really love the Tesla and Pandora novels, but I hold the Killing Moon novel in extra special high regard because it's so different from the game. And despite playing the game millions of times, I was on the edge of my seat while reading the novel and immensely enjoyed all the huge differences and cliffhangers. Will the upcoming novels have big differences and alternative cliffhangers just like Under a Killing Moon did? Are they going to be more canon?
Well, very quickly, if you don't know the story behind it, the Pandora Directive novel I actually wrote prior to us producing the game. That's why they're so similar, is because we based the script of the game off the book. Under a Killing Moon was written after that as a novelization, and the reason why it's so different is because it was the first story I'd written for a game, and I was so inexperienced with writing stories for video games that first time through that I wrote a game that was about 1,000 times too big to turn into a game. And so the original story was massive, and we ended up really scaling it down for the game. And when I wrote the novelization, I'm like, well, I'm going to take it back to more of what I had in mind originally, which is why it goes in a lot of different directions. Tesla Effect, again, I wrote the first half of the book prior to the game going into development, and you'll notice that the first half of the game and the book are fairly similar. It's the second half that really go in different directions, and that's because I was writing the book while they were making the game. I wasn't directly involved in the development of the game because I was working for Electronic Arts at the time.
Sure.
So that's kind of why you have those differences. It wasn't because I just intentionally wanted them to be a different experience. But as I said, the new novel, it'll be coming out in the summer. It's tentatively titled Tex Murphy and the Romanoff Enigma, is its own story. So that one will be a standalone. It won't be connected to any game. And then the Poison Pawn novel will probably be fairly close to what we do in this game. There will be some significant differences, but be fairly close.
Okay, fantastic. Aaron, I think it's time we got back to work.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Take it easy, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful time. Go, where's the camera? It's over there. Okay. Goodbye.